Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm very excited to get to share this message with you today. I've had so much joy as I've been preparing, so I hope that the joy is catching. So like Tim shared, I'm going to be talking about the tabernacle, and this message we've had several messages recently kind of inspired by the Torah portions, and this is one of those, but it's really kind of about the tabernacle in general, though we'll talk about some parts of the portion as well. But the title of my message this morning is "The Tabernacle Was and is to come." So that'll be kind of our guiding statement outline, so to speak, as we go. So we'll talk about each of those realities, the was, the is, and the is to come. But I want to share a little bit of my journey with the tabernacle before I jump into all of that. So I've always been fascinated by it, and for a long time I didn't really know why. Even before I really started seriously studying the Torah and reading the portions on a yearly basis, I was just really intrigued by this place of worship that was so different from anything that I knew, but it seemed like it was really important. So over the years, my love for it and my interest has grown. And I think back to a moment in 2017, I got to go to Israel on a trip with Tom. And we visited Shiloh, where the tabernacle rested. Once the Israelites came into Israel, the tabernacle rested at Shiloh for about 400 years before King David moved it to Jerusalem, and it was ultimately replaced by Solomon's temple. But from the moment, I remember we're on a tour bus, and we pull into the parking lot, and I just started crying. I mean, and at this point, I can't see anything. We're like in the parking lot of like a visitor center. So like it's like a gift shop, visitor center, like nothing ancient about it. And I'm like crying. And Sam Van Buskirk was on the trip with us, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. He's like, it's okay. Just go with it. And I was like, okay. So I felt that way the whole time, and it was just like feeling like this history of the presence of the Lord dwelling there for such a long time. And it was just such a moment that marked me with it, and it just, I think about that moment so much. But as I've continued to study the Torah, I just see how central this tabernacle idea really is to the story. Most of you know that I do have this particular love of Leviticus. And actually, from this week's portion on through the rest of Exodus, I consider it to be the setup for Leviticus. So you might think we're still in Exodus, but we're actually in pre-Leviticus. But because something that struck out to me several years back was that Leviticus takes place in the tabernacle. I think sometimes I've done this, so I'm not pointing fingers. I'm saying I used to have this reality, and the Lord has shifted it. I used to read through the tabernacle, and of course you get to the end of the Exodus, and the presence fills in. It's so great. And then you turn the page, and it's like the Lord says to Moses, and it starts describing the sacrificial system, and you're like, well, this is kind of a bummer. Feels like you have this glory moment, and then you move out of it. But actually, I would encourage you to try to see it as just a continuation of it, because it's actually the presence fills it, and God starts talking to Moses, and what he says is in Leviticus. So anyway, this is not a Leviticus message, really, kind of, but I just have to say that. But to that point, several years ago, we would do like portions of the Torah portion with the 9 to 12-year-olds, and I was very blessed to receive the first portion of Leviticus to teach. And so I borrowed a model of the tabernacle from Tom and Leah, and we went, that's what we did as our first lesson, is we talked about the tabernacle, and we talked about all the different pieces of it so that you can picture where these things are taking place. And then I taught it to the 9 to 12-year-olds at Tikkun last summer, and I built a very rudimentary out of cardboard tabernacle in the classroom, and we interacted with it. So clearly I like this topic. I really like to talk about it. And the more I study it and the more I teach it, the more I just am amazed by it. It's sometimes I think we get ingrained that we think tabernacle and we think sacrifice. Yes, of course the sacrifices happened there, but it's so much more than that. And I think it's just this central structure that just communicates God's heart to dwell with his people, his desire to dwell with his people. But sometimes this is really challenging because we get to portions like this week's, and we read all these details and we're like, well, tabernacles and temples are not really part of our modern world, our modern worship experience. And so it just feels really kind of foreign and unrelatable. And we have all these details, rings and rods and cubits and all the things. And we're like, I don't really know about this. And I've had moments when I've gotten to it where it's like, okay, we're to the point, all the details, skim, flip, 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 okay, get to something else. But I felt like the Lord gave me kind of a silly little analogy, and I think good Bible teachers have their silly little analogies, so I'm going to share it with you, is that maybe these portions with all these details are like the Midwest of the Bible. So let me explain that. I am Midwestern. I am kind of as Midwestern as it gets. I was born in central Nebraska, and then I've lived in Wisconsin, Missouri, and Kansas. And I've taken a lot of road trips around all of the Midwest and other areas as well. So I've driven through a lot of farmland and a lot of small towns. I visited small towns where there's exactly one paved road. And I have also visited Midwestern cities like Minneapolis and Chicago, and obviously I live in Kansas City. Something I've noticed outside of the Midwest, or from people who are visiting sometimes, is that people who are not in the Midwest, from the coast or the mountains, tend to not think that there's really a whole lot that's very interesting out here. They call it flyover country. It's what you have to get through to get to one of the coasts or one of the mountain ranges. But, as you all know, because you live in this glorious part of the country, if you spend time here, you realize that it's beautiful. The people are beautiful. The land, while may not have the majesty of the Rockies or beautiful ocean views, also has its own type of beauty. So as you spend time here, you start to realize that there's a lot of beauty to it as well. So people have described me outside of the Midwest as being very Midwestern, and I've just decided to take it as a compliment. I'm not sure if that's what they mean, but we'll just go with that. But anyway, as I was thinking about these portions, these really detailed sections, that sometimes I think about the tabernacle and even many parts of Leviticus, that we kind of start to think of it as like this flyover country of the Bible. We start to have thoughts like, those details don't really apply to us anymore. I don't need to spend a whole lot of time here. After all, we don't have a tabernacle or a temple. Yeshua came as the ultimate sacrifice, so we don't need a place for sacrifices. So I'll just skim real quick and get back to the good stuff. But what if the tabernacle isn't just about the tabernacle? What if the tabernacle represents something that reaches back to the Garden of Eden, made a way for God to dwell among his people, gives us insight into who the Messiah really is, shows us how to live as God's people in this already not yet period where the kingdom has been established but is not yet in fullness, and it points to the hope that we have for the restoration of all things and the age to come, where we live in the fully saturated reality of the presence of God. What if the tabernacle is about all of that? So that's what I want to introduce to you today, is this idea that the tabernacle was and is to come. I want to pull this thread from Genesis to Revelation that teaches us about God and his desire to dwell with his people. We're going to spend most of our time on the was and is portions and then just briefly talk about the is to come part at the end. But I'm hoping that you'll see that there's something bigger than just this one place that's revealed through this tabernacle. But before we dive into the tabernacle itself, it died. Oh, it's back. Thank you. Sorry. I'm like, don't push buttons. Anyway, okay. So before we dive into the tabernacle itself, I want to say this. The tabernacle and God's presence and participation in his dwelling on the earth is for everyone. So we read this actually earlier as part of our Torah reading portion, but I'm going to read it again. So this is the beginning of actually this week's portion in Exodus 25, verses 1 through 8. It says, Adonai spoke to Moses saying, tell Bnei Israel to take up an offering for me. From anyone whose heart compels him, you are to take my offering. These are the contributions that you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet cloth, fine linen and goat hair, ram skins dyed red, seal skins, acacia wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, and the sweet incense, onyx stones and setting stones for the ephod and the breastplate. Have them make a sanctuary for me. so that I may dwell among them. Robert Alter, who's a Jewish scholar who's done a translation and commentary on the Tanakh, actually translate that so I may dwell among them as so I may abide in their midst. And what does that make us think of as believers in Yeshua, right? This abide in the vine, this John 15, abide in the vine, abide with him so that he can abide with us, right? Which I think that's pretty amazing because he's not a believer in Yeshua. But so it says that those so that's are really important in the Bible, if you don't know. So that I may dwell in their midst. Remember I said before, we tend to think tabernacle, we think sacrifice. But that's not what it says. God doesn't say build a tabernacle so you can sacrifice to me. God says build a tabernacle so I can dwell with you, so I can be in your midst. And everyone got to bring something. Everyone whose heart compelled them brought all of this. Fun fact, all of this gold and silver and bronze and all those things that they got, where did they get them? Egypt. They plundered the Egyptians on their way out. Actually, the Egyptians said, this is not going well. Please leave and here's all our stuff. It was their parting gift from Egypt, and that's what becomes God's dwelling place. It's pretty amazing. Anyway, the point is everybody brought something. Everybody gave out of what they had, and I love to think about that because as we're going to talk about the tabernacle, not everybody had access to every part of the tabernacle. But what if the gold that was brought, that's maybe on the cover of the ark or on the golden menorah, it's from someone from the tribe of Benjamin, who's never going to enter those parts of the tabernacle. And yet something they brought to the Lord is there and in service to him all the time. So everybody gets to participate. It's an all-play kind of game. So it's important to remember those things as we continue. Okay, so now we'll get into the tabernacle itself. I'm so excited. Okay, sorry guys. Okay, so we're going to start with this section that the tabernacle was. So, like we've already mentioned, the instructions for the physical tabernacle begin in Exodus 25. But the tabernacle, the idea for the tabernacle, is actually connected back to Eden, arguably before that. In Genesis 1 and 2, God creates the heavens and the earth and everything in them. And the culmination of that creation is the creation of humanity. Humans are made in the image of God, yes? So... And then he creates humans on the 6th day, and then the 7th day is the Sabbath. And so I always really enjoy this. I think it's kind of funny. There's a worship leader named Jonathan David Helser who actually wrote the song that we sang to open service today. And he talks about this, that like what it would be like to be Adam and be created, and then the very next day is this Sabbath of just God spending time with him. And it's like, he says it's like God is saying, I took the whole day off work to spend time with you. And I just think that's really sweet. I just really like that really relational picture of that. It's just this good father that's like, I just want to be with you. So the beginning of humanity is this perfect fullness of dwelling between God and man in the garden. But we all know what comes next. Sin enters the world. Humans have to leave the garden and are consequently no longer able to enjoy the full presence of God on the earth with them. Genesis 3:24 says that he expelled the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he had cherubim dwell, along with the whirling sword of flame to guard the way to the tree of life. Keep those cherubim in mind. We're going to come back to those later. So this is such a sad moment, right? This presence is broken. And the authors of the book, God's Relational Presence, actually call this separation the central catastrophe of the biblical drama. Right? It's like, think about what that means for a second. Because if God is primarily relational, as we talk about it all the time, and he's now unable to fully dwell with his people that he made in his image, he's sad, right? This is not a world that he wants us to be living in. So he wants to give a way back. And really that journey, that way back, is the journey of the rest of the Bible. So Genesis, if we look at Genesis as a whole, we actually see this movement from life to death. Of course, we start with fullness of life in the garden. Then we have, soon after the expulsion, we have the first death, right, when Cain kills Abel. And then the book of Genesis actually ends with the death of Joseph in Egypt. So we've gone from God's chosen place, the garden, full presence between God and man, to Egypt. Nothing could be more different. The Egyptians were fixated with death. Like, think about the pyramids. They're about death, right? They're tombs. Their worship and culture are as far away from how God wants it as possible. So we end Genesis, figuratively speaking, as far away from the presence of God as we could get. However, we know that God has still been showing up to his people. So it's not that he's abandoned them, but we're still not in this close reality. We have these moments where he shows up. We do have people who are faithful, but there's not a fullness there. So when we start the book of Exodus, we start this moving back toward the dwelling with God. The Israelites, of course, are miraculously delivered from death out of Egypt, and they're moving back towards the promised land. They're led by a pillar of cloud by day, fire by night, which is a manifestation of God's presence like they haven't experienced before, though not altogether very personal at this point. And when the Israelites arrive at Sinai, God is ready to establish his presence among them once again. I wish we had time to go through all of this in great detail, but we don't. But if you go back and you look at Exodus 19 and Exodus 24, you start, because those are two kind of accounts of what's really happening at Mount Sinai. You start to see some sections to it. So all the people come around the base of the mountain. They're instructed to be sanctified, but they're also instructed that they may not go up the mountain and they may not even touch it. So then as Moses goes up, he actually takes Aaron and the 70 elders. They go partway up the mountain. And everyone except for Moses is going to stop partway up. And Exodus 24:11 says, they beheld God and ate and drank. So they had a particular experience with God and some table fellowship. Praise the Lord for food and drink. And then Moses himself goes up to the very top of the mountain. And here's where the presence of God comes down in as full a way as I think humans can withstand in this current age. And Exodus 19:18 says, now the entire Mount Sinai was in smoke because Adonai had descended upon it in fire. The smoke ascended with the smoke of a furnace, like the smoke of a furnace. The whole mountain quaked greatly. So these are things, even the people on the bottom of the mountain, they're gonna experience this. They're gonna see smoke. They're gonna see fire. They're going to see, they're gonna feel the quaking. So everybody is experiencing God's presence up there, but from different places. So Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days and nights, and God shows him, among other things, the plan for the tabernacle. Based off of, apparently, a heavenly original. Apparently, there's a tabernacle in heaven, which is great. So if you can, somebody back there can put up the first picture for me that I have. Okay, so I like pictures and I like diagrams. So we're going to talk about some of the specifics of these pieces in a second, but I want to show you something really cool. So there are some parallels between Mount Sinai and the tabernacle. So the base of the mountain, remember I said all the people come around the base of the mountain? So the outer court, which is the outer rectangle of this, where the altar is and the laver, is a parallel to this. This is where all the people brought their offerings. And even if, we're not going to get into all the details, but they couldn't enter exactly into it, they can be around it. So this is the area where all the people can come. And then the next section it's labeled as the holy place. It's that kind of middle little rectangle up there where the lampstand, this table of showbread, and the altar of incense are, is kind of parallel to this midway point on the mountain. So Aaron and the 70 were able to go there. That's where they ate and drank. Interesting that the table of showbread is in there. And so this is kind of the inner court. So there's priests. There's a greater number of priests that are able to go there to tend to these elements. And then finally, we have the Holy of Holies up there, where the Ark of the Covenant is. And only Moses was able to go there, and eventually only the high priest, once a year on Yom Kippur. So essentially, the tabernacle, among other things, becomes this portable Mount Sinai experience. So hopefully that's exciting to some of you, because we love the Sinai stories and how powerful they are. So hopefully the fact that God gave them this this kind of physical, portable reality of it in their midst is pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. So I want to talk about a couple of the specifics and show you some meaning behind a few of the things, which this one doesn't show this first one, but I wanted it to be clear as I was giving that description. But I want to talk a little bit about the curtains. So there are curtains that are around the edge of the tabernacle, and then there would also be curtains around kind of each part. And so Exodus 26 says that, moreover, you are to make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine woven linen of blue, purple, and scarlet, with cherubim. Remember I told you that we'd come back to the cherubim? Made by the work of a skillful craftsman. So this is really interesting. So remember when they were cast out of the garden, God posed cherubim at the entrance to the Garden of Eden, and they're kind of the guards of the Garden of Eden. And here, they're on the outer, so they would be like where the big rectangle line is around the edge of everything, is where the curtains would be. Now there's cherubim there, and actually Lori talked a little bit about this in Torah study this morning, that whereas with the garden, the cherubim are there to keep people out because they're no longer allowed to enter the presence of God in the garden. Now they are here to guard the way into God's presence. Because the curtains would essentially open there at the front of the tabernacle, and you would enter kind of between them. And then the cherubim are actually also on the veil between the inner court of the holy place and the Holy of Holies as well. So cherubim always mark holy spaces. And the Israelites would know this. The Israelites would know this story of Eden and that they were guarding the entrance to Eden, and that God is then instructing them and showing them that they are going to be on this tabernacle. That would be very significant to them. So the next part of the tabernacle the next few parts actually that I want to mention are going to start to connect us to how the tabernacle relates to us after it's not physically present anymore. So, and all of these, I'm just going to briefly mention them here, but whenever I teach this class, stay tuned, dates to come, I will go through these in more detail because this is so fascinating to me, how this all the symbolism and all these things that are in there, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of them briefly for now. So the first one is the Ark of the Covenant. So, of course, this is what's in the Holy of Holies. And also, we mentioned cherubim, that cherubim are on top of that ark cover, and they are also, so the Holy of Holies is kind of what's referred to sometimes as, there we have the verses that say heaven is his throne and the earth is his footstool, and it's referring to that. So it's where the presence of God comes down. This is where God speaks to Moses from over the cover of the ark. And they call that the atonement cover. Significant. We'll talk about that later. So Exodus 25:16 records God saying to Moses, "You are to put the testimony which I will give you into the ark." So this testimony is ultimately going to be the 10 words and lots of other instructions that we find where? Leviticus. Sorry, I can't help myself. And then going on in Exodus 25:22, he says, "I will meet with you there. I will speak with you." This is God talking to Moses. "I will speak with you from above the atonement cover, between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, about all that I command you for B'nai Israel." So we have atonement, we have testimony, which is the word of God, we have meeting face to face. All these things are starting to sound a little bit like Yeshua to me. He atones for our sins. He is called the living Torah. He came as God made flesh to literally be with his people face to face. Okay, so let's talk about another one. So the table of showbread in the inner court there. Exodus 25, 23 through 30 kind of describes this whole table. And verse 30 says, "Always set the bread of the presence on the table before me." And the Hebrew in there is this kind of face-to-face kind of language. The Hebrew root is this face-to-face wording there. And Yeshua actually gave himself a name connected to this part of the tabernacle. John 6:35, Yeshua says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." So we have this table of showbread, this bread of the presence, and we have Yeshua as the living bread of life. Okay, one more example. So the golden menorah. This one is really cool, and we could talk about it for a long time, but we won't. Exodus 25, 31 through 40 gives the details about this part. In verse 37, it says, "You are also to make the 7 lamps for it and set the lamps up to shed light over the space before it." So actually, the design of the golden menorah is based off of an almond tree, and it's also meant to represent the tree of life in the garden. So this is actually another direct connection back to this Eden reality. And also, Yeshua gives himself another name that corresponds with this element. John 8:12, we're all very familiar with this one. Yeshua says, "I am the light of the world. The one who follows me will no longer walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So just as the menorah in the tabernacle is shedding light into the space there, Yeshua comes to bring light to all of us so we no longer have to walk in darkness. We could go through each piece of the tabernacle and draw these parallels. The bronze laver connects to Yeshua as living water. The altar of sacrifice, of course, connects to Yeshua as the sacrificial lamb. We could expand a lot more on all of these, but I just wanted you to start seeing some of these parallels here. And something I would really suggest to you as you're studying the tabernacle in Exodus and also even in Leviticus is that you find a visual. Like I said, it's kind of hard for us to relate to. We don't have systems like this right now. So it's kind of hard for us to relate to. So I rarely tell people to Google things, but if you do an image search and just put in wilderness tabernacle, you'll come up with some really cool drawings or representations that it might help you connect with what you're reading. Or I have this. I know you won't be able to see this all from here, but this is one that I really like. That's just a pretty drawing, and I'm not so worried about it being completely perfect, but this is in, what's it called? The Holman Book of Biblical Charts, Maps, and Reconstructions. So that's the Bible nerd in me. I like maps and charts and drawings and things, but I think they're helpful when we're reading about these things that we don't know how to relate to. It's nice to have something in front of you to relate to, and so if you're reading passages where they're talking about bringing their sacrifices, if you have something to look at, then sometimes I think that can be helpful. Okay, so at the end of Exodus, we have the tabernacle completed. The presence of God fills it, and God has essentially achieved a level of what was lost when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. He is dwelling with his people once again. So the tabernacle is now literally at the center of the Israelites, and it serves as this partial restoration back to Eden as well as this portable Sinai experience. So there's a 3-part kind of covenantal reality that's repeated throughout the Bible. It's this, I will be your God, you will be my people, and I will dwell in your midst. And this has become a reality like never before with the completion of the tabernacle. But now we have a problem. Now we have a holy God dwelling among an unholy people. So as we've seen, as people have encountered God outside of the garden so far in the story, usually the presence of God, this angel of the Lord figure, is quite dramatic, and sometimes is kind of scary to people because he's really powerful. So his presence is powerful, sometimes scary. It's a big deal. So what's the answer to that? Leviticus. Sorry. Because Leviticus this is how you live so that a holy God can dwell in your midst. And it's also this is how you relate to one another to be in a way that honors one another and honors the Lord. It is, the simplest summary is love God, love neighbor. But I like how L. Michael Morales, who wrote one of my favorite books on Leviticus called Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord? He says, it is the covenantal purpose of God that necessitates the book of Leviticus and unfolds both the glory of his dwelling place and the rituals required amidst the impending danger suddenly posed to Israel by that presence. So there's this powerful and dangerous element to the Lord, but he's given us a way to live with that presence. Okay, we're going to move on into the next section, this tabernacle is section. So of course, the tabernacle ultimately becomes the pattern for both temples. Those eras are very important and interesting. But then we come to this age that we are currently in. And by age, I mean, it's kind of like we've been in the end times for the last 2,000 years. We've also been in this age of the tabernacle is for 2,000 years. So Yeshua has come and we're awaiting his return. But in the meantime, I think there's some things and some shadows of the tabernacle that have remained with us. So I want to look at both the spiritual and the physical realities of that. We're going to look at the physical first in both the Jewish world and the Christian world. So we live by the to the Jew first principle, so we'll start with the Jewish world. So synagogues started popping up in Jewish areas around the world a couple centuries before Yeshua came, but they served mostly as places for people to gather. So they were like places for fellowship for people who were living in the diaspora or outside of Israel who didn't have immediate access to the temple all the time. So we can go to the next picture. So this is an example of a first century synagogue. So this is actually a recreated synagogue at Nazareth Village in Israel. And as you can see, it's very simple. So you can see kind of the steps or the ledges around the edge. That's where all the people would sit, and then they would read the Torah and speak from the middle. So it was a place for reading Torah, but it was a place for fellowship, a place for gathering if they didn't have access to the temple itself. So this is the type of synagogue, just for fun. This is the type of synagogue that Yeshua was in during the story in Luke 4 when he's reading from the Isaiah scroll, and then he says, and today these scriptures have been fulfilled in your hearing. This is the type of setting that he would have been in for that. So it's kind of fun. So after Yeshua comes and after the temple is destroyed in 70 CE, the synagogues become a more central part of Jewish life. So prayers start taking place at the same time during the day that the sacrifices would have. Torah reading becomes even more important, teaching. So really the synagogue then becomes the center of Jewish life and thankfully helps preserve the Jewish people while they're not in Israel and while there's no temple and all these things. It's something the synagogues were really important to maintaining Jewish identity. So if we can go to the next picture. So this is the old new synagogue in Prague. I chose places that I've been and that I like. So this is in Prague, and this is actually the oldest synagogue that's still standing in Europe. It was built in the 13th century because the Jewish quarter of Prague was not destroyed in the war, which is pretty fantastic. So this synagogue is still there. They're still having services and things there. But what I want to show you is how this relates to the structure of the tabernacle. So remember we talked about the outer court, which is where the people were around the mountain, where the sacrifices were offered. So you can kind of see some of these chairs and little desks around the very perimeter of the room here. So that is parallel to that. And then so the inner court, so this middle structure here, there you can kind of see it. It's probably hard to see from back there, but there's a bima where they would bring the Torah scroll out and they would read the Torah from there. And so those reading the Torah would bring the scroll there to the middle section, which is kind of similar to our inner court situation. And then on the back wall, you can kind of see a rectangle that's kind of gold with a little bit of red in it along the back wall there. That is where the Ark of the Torah is. So that's where the Torah scrolls are kept. And is kind of parallel to the Holy of Holies. So you can see that these synagogues, as they started to become the center of Jewish life, carried very much the elements of the tabernacle. And Christian churches actually worked in a similar way. So if we can go to the next photo. So this is, my mom is enjoying this. So this is the church that my mom grew up in. And where my parents were married, actually. This church was built in 1906. It is in a very small town in northeast Nebraska, and I think it's beautiful. And it's easy to see, too, because it's so white. But you can see the elements. So we have the altar space. So you can see Jesus represented up there. And then there's the altar space, which is where kind of the pastor would preside over. And then you can see that rail, that white kind of shorter rail there in the middle, which is where often you would come up to take communion, but it is very much this inner court reality. And also remember when Aaron and the 70 went up, they ate and drank, right, on the middle section. So it's interesting that this is where we take communion. And then, of course, the rest of the sanctuary would be that, like the outer court where all the people are. So we can see these. And then you can see, actually, this is kind of, you can actually see it in this picture. The red light to the right on there is this like ever-burning light, this ever-burning candle, which is kind of parallel to the menorah, the light that's always burning in the tabernacle. Most churches, traditional churches, have this, and actually it's in the synagogues too. You couldn't see it in that picture of the Old New Synagogue, but there is this red light or candle with a red, whatever, cover on it in there as well. So, so the symbolism is there. Can I tell a fun story about this church really quick? Because my mom will appreciate it. So like I said, this is where my parents got married. My grandma also lived her whole life there, and we attended, my mom's gonna think it's really funny that I tell this story. So it must have been the 100th anniversary, 125th anniversary of the church. I was like, it was important. We attended this celebration and this dinner, and I was probably like in high school at the time, and they're talking about the history of this church, and they're sharing all these things, and I'm not fully listening, probably. We're like eating dinner, and they're like talking about a whole bunch of names and people that I don't know. And then all of a sudden, my ears perk up because they say, and then the Mullers showed up. Say, my mom's last name is Muller, which is a German name, because my grandfather was German. This church was originally a Swedish Lutheran church. So they originally had services in Swedish, yeah? So it was all Swedish people who were part of this church. And then the story, the way I've always been told it, is they started having services in English, and my grandfather's German family wanted to attend this church. So they were the first German family in the Swedish church. And so my grandparents met. So really, this church is important to me too. Without this church, I wouldn't be here for you. So anyway, so that's a kind of a self-serving story, but I think it's funny. Anyway, churches, traditional churches. So Catholic churches, Anglican churches, Episcopal, all these more traditional type of churches all have this symbolism in there. Even the baptismal font, which is this little white structure over here, you could say, I don't know, people draw different parallels with it, either to a mikveh or to the bronze laver. So there's lots of symbolism here. Okay, we got to keep going. I'm getting too excited about all of these things. Okay. Okay, so that's the physical. So this is how we can still see some of these elements of the tabernacle in the physical realm, and we can take the picture down if you want to. But there's also this spiritual reality to this tabernacle is. So the primary purpose of the tabernacle, right, is this dwelling place of God's presence. So again, verses we're very familiar with. Acts 2, 1-4 says, when the day of Shavuot had come, they were all together in one place. Suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the whole house where they were sitting. And tongues like fire spreading out appeared to them, settled on each one of them, and they were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh and began to speak in other tongues as the Ruach enabled them. So this wind and fire sounds a lot like Sinai, doesn't it? And of course, they're celebrating Shavuot, which is the Jewish holiday that celebrates the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So they're being filled with the Holy Spirit, and this account and this situation sounds a lot like the presence of God filling the tabernacle as well. So I would say this is the moment where we, as the body of Messiah, become the living tabernacle. Just a couple more passages about this topic. So another familiar one, 1 Peter 2, 4-5. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by man, but chosen by God and precious, you also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house, a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Messiah Yeshua. So we're both this house, this dwelling place, and this priesthood. We are a place for his presence to dwell, and we are called to minister and worship him. And finally, one more passage about this, Ephesians 2, 20 through 22. You have been built on the foundation made up of the emissaries and prophets, the Messiah Yeshua himself being the cornerstone. In him, the whole building, being fitted together, is growing into a holy temple for the Lord. In him, you are also being built together into God's dwelling place in the Ruach. So this is part of this Jew-Gentile unity section in the body of Messiah. So we're meant to, as Jew and Gentile, be this dwelling place together. Hebrews also has a lot of these, but if I started going through Hebrews, we'd be here all day. So that's for another day. But all that to say is that there's this language and these comparisons that are showing us that just because we don't have a tabernacle in our midst, because we have the presence of God dwelling in us, we become that tabernacle. So what are some of the ways that we can live like that? As Yeshua did. As the light of the world. Even think about Israel's calling to be a light to the nations, right? We can be the living water that brings refreshing and encouragement to others. We didn't talk about this one, but incense, there's this great parallel about the altar of incense and intercession, the comparison with intercession rising to the Lord. So we can bring this offering of intercession, and we can use our confession, our confessing of sins and asking to be cleansed is this sacrificial, compares to this sacrificial system. So we can live out some of these realities of the tabernacle as the dwelling place of the Lord. So hopefully you'll look at the tabernacle and its elements and its functions and start to ask yourself how you can be a vessel of God's presence, how you can minister to him, and how you can draw others to him. Okay, so we've reached the final section. The tabernacle is to come. Ultimately, of course, the goal is that God, the Father, and Yeshua want to dwell fully with humanity once again. And we're promised that's exactly what is to come. So I just want to read a couple sections from Revelation 21 and 22. And as I read them, just be listening and think about some of the language from the tabernacle that's present there, and see how even in the age to come, some of these things are still present. So we'll start with Revelation 21, verse 1 to 5. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I also heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling of God is among men, and he shall tabernacle among them. They shall be his people, and God himself shall be among them and be their God. He shall wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Nor shall there be any mourning or crying or pain any longer, for the former things have passed away." And the one seated on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." And skipping down to verse 10, then he carried me away in the Ruach to a great and high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, her radiance like a most precious stone, like a jasper, sparkling like crystal. She had a great high wall with 12 gates, and above the gates 12 angels. On the gates were inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of Bnei Israel, 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them the 12 names of 12 emissaries of the Lamb. So in these passages, we're seeing both the God dwelling with his people, and also we're seeing some structure that sounds really similar to the tabernacle. Okay, last passage. So Revelation 21:22 through chapter 22, verse 5. I saw no temple in her, for its temple is Adonai Elohei Tzebaot and the Lamb. And the city has no need for the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God lights it up, and the lamp is the Lamb. The nations shall walk by its light, and the kings of the earth bring their glory into it. Its gates shall never be shut by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring into it the glory and honor of the nations. And nothing unholy shall ever enter it, nor anything doing what is detestable or false, but only those written in the book of life. Then the angel showed me a river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the city street. On either side of the river was a tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in the city, and his servants shall serve him. They shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads. Night shall be no more, and the people will have no need for lamplight or sunlight, as for Adonai Elohim will shine on them, and they shall reign forever and ever. I love this passage so much. So we have this water of life, right? We have a throne. No longer is heaven his throne and the earth his footstool. They have come together, and he is enthroned in the midst of his people. We have this tree of life once again. Remember that menorah points us back to the tree of life in the garden, but that tree is back again. So we've come back to this fullness. So from the garden to Sinai, to the tabernacle, to the temple, to the first coming of Yeshua and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, to the new Jerusalem in the age to come, God's desire is to dwell with his people. In Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord, Morales says this: the tabernacle represents the divine desire to dwell with humanity, the goal of both creation and redemption, as the essence of covenant theology, its promissory root, its redemptive historical vine, and its eschatological fruit realized in the new heavens and earth. So my hope for us is that we grow to desire and seek a life where his presence dwells within us while we wait for this complete and total fulfillment of his redemption plan, where he dwells with us face to face forever. He wants to be with you. Do you want to be with him? Shabbat shalom.